This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio on the Overseas Radio Network. You can join our conversation by calling toll-free in the U.S. and Canada at 1-855-655-2121 or by Skype at ORN Live, or you can email me at david@truthandliesradio.com. Well, former Florida Governor Jeb Bush, one of the silk-stocking Republicans, wing of the party that I so despise, has a new job, and I guess it's, if one wanted to be nice, one could call it making revisionist history. I prefer to think about it as being a manure spreader. Jeb Bush is now calling for a more moderate Republican Party, one he says his father and Ronald Reagan would embrace. Jeb told reporters that his father and Reagan would not have agreed with today's GOP, which has been moving more to the right and following with strict adherence to ideology. He said Ronald Reagan would have, based on his record of finding accommodation, finding some degree of common ground, similar to my dad, they would have had a hard time if you define the Republican Party, and I don't, as having an orthodoxy that doesn't allow for disagreement. Back in my dad's time, or Ronald Reagan's time, they got a lot of stuff done, and with bipartisan support right now, that would be difficult to imagine that happening. Well, I was there when Ronald Reagan was in the White House, and I'm sorry, former Governor Bush, you were either senile or a liar. Ronald Reagan, yes, would not embrace this Republican Party because it's gone too damned far to the left. Ronald Reagan said our goal ought to be the greatest degree of individual freedom consistent with an orderly society. Ronald Reagan said government is not the solution to the problem. Government is the problem. Ronald Reagan got accommodations from Congress by going over the head of Congress when it was controlled by the Democrats to the American people and getting them energized so that a large portion of the Democrat Party voted for measures that Ronald Reagan wanted. Ronald Reagan stood for principles. To compare Ronald Reagan and George Bush, who in fact called Reaganomics voodoo economics, and it was the only economics that have worked in a long time. Ronald Reagan had the same economics as John Kennedy. Lower taxes, lower regulation, and then you spur the economy. This is just absolute hogwash. This is all smoke and mirrors. It's lies. And it spits right on the grave of Ronald Reagan. And to put Ronald Reagan, the greatest president of modern times, in the same league with George H.W. Bush, that Ivy League silk-stocking Republican, super rich, blue blood creep, makes me want to throw up. And it's unfortunate because Jeb Bush seemed to have a good record as governor in Florida. But then George W. Bush had a pretty good record as governor of Texas. And then when he went to Washington, he became a dictator. But as someone who was there, I can tell you that Jeb Bush is not telling the truth. He is sucking up to the Republican establishment, which is not standing for the principles of Ronald Reagan at all. And when they invoke Ronald Reagan like that, I just want to scream. Now, yesterday, I said something that I think annoyed a few people, which it was intended to. I said, America used to be known as the land of the free and the home of the brave, and America is no longer the land of the free because it's no longer the home of the brave. And I will give you a perfect example of that. In Aurora, Colorado, police searching for suspected bank robbers locked down an entire intersection. They took 40 random motorists out of their cars at gunpoint, handcuffed them, and then asked them for permission to search their vehicles. Of course, no one in handcuffs refused permission. Police said they had received what they called a reliable tip that the culprit in an armed robbery at Wells Fargo Bank committed earlier was stopped at that red light. The police admit they didn't have a description. They didn't know the race or gender or anything. So they made a split-second decision to stop all the cars at the intersection and search for the armed robber. That's according to police officer Frank Fania. Officers barricaded the area, halting 19 cars. The action itself is startling. 40 people guilty of nothing more than proximity of being in the same general area where a suspected criminal might also be were literally pulled from their vehicles, shackled, and detained for more than 2 hours, even after it was obvious they were guilty of no crime at all. Now, the only thing that happens in the police's favor is the last car they stopped had the criminal in. But you know what? They put all of those people at risk. Because if you're in handcuffs and a bunch of bullets start flying, you don't have much ability to protect yourself, do you? And the cops, I'm sure, are not going to be like the civil service and shield your body with theirs. So they violated the rights of all the people and got away with it. But what's even more startling to me, what's amazing to me, what's frustrating to me, is that not one of these 40 innocent people protested. Not one said, "I'm sorry, officer, but unless I've committed a crime, I'd like to be free to go about my business." Not one said, "I do not consent to any searches." None complained when they were handcuffed. I would have screamed bloody murder. Are you arresting me? If not, take these damned handcuffs off me. No, you cannot search my car. You get a court order before you search my car. No, you do not have my consent. And then I would call out to the nearest police officer and say, "Officer, I want this police officer arrested. He is kidnapping me because he's holding me against my will, without probable cause, without a warrant, without a court order." But these lemmings, these sheep, said, "Okay, that's okay. Trample our rights. It doesn't matter." They don't deserve to be called American citizens. These are the people that have left America and caused America to be in the situation in which it finds itself. A rapidly turning from a police state into a totalitarian police state. They didn't even say no. I cannot believe it. This was absolutely an unconstitutional action. People, if anybody without a badge did that, they would be guilty of kidnapping. But the police can do it, and the people don't care. Now, what does that tell you? Obviously, Aurora, Colorado must be one of the cities with the lowest IQ or the lowest self-esteem in the entire United States. And lest there be any mistake, if I'm insulting the people of Aurora, Colorado, I am. I'm especially insulting these 40 people. I'm more angry at them than I am at the cops. You know, the cops may have been stupid, and they certainly should have known the law better, and they certainly acted improperly, but they were probably focused on trying to catch a criminal. It still doesn't give them the right to violate their rights. But not one person protested and reminded them. No one said, "I'm an American citizen. You can't do that to me." Anglo-Irish parliamentarian Edmund Burke said, "All that is needed for evil to triumph is that good men do nothing." And these people did nothing. And they consented. And they established a precedent which will be used over and over and wider and wider and wider. When I was 16 years old and the cops stopped me because I had somebody in the car they thought was a drug dealer, I refused to let them search my car, and they dared not push it because the law was on my side. These people should have. Now we have to break for a commercial. We'll be back in 3.5 minutes. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio on the Overseas Radio Network. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio on the Overseas Radio Network. Well, today is the third segment of the Finzer Primer on the Bill of Rights. As my regular listeners know, I found last week from the archives of the United States the actual joint congressional resolution proposing the Bill of Rights to the states, and in it found words in the preamble that I'd never seen before, that the Bill of Rights were proposed to the states in order to prevent misconstruction or abuse of its powers, and that further declaratory and restrictive clauses should be added to the Constitution. Now, I have good news. I found one of the amendments in the Bill of Rights that, to my knowledge, has not been violated. Only one. Amendment 3. No soldier shall in time of peace be quartered in any house without consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. So we've got 1 out of 10 that hasn't been violated. However, since that's all we have to say about that one, let's move on to the Fourth Amendment. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Now, all we have to do is to start with apply that amendment to the last story. Were those people in those cars secure in their persons? Were they seized and searched without a warrant? Was there probable cause to seize and search them all? Was there a court order describing the place to be searched, particularly describing it, and the persons and things to be seized? Of course not. They didn't even know the race or the sex of the person for whom they were looking. So they rounded up, it's sort of like something out of, remember Casablanca? Round up all the usual suspects? Well, that's the way it has become. And now we have FISA courts issuing secret warrants. We have secret searches and seizures. We have the FBI being able to write their own warrants to go into your house as long as it's national security, and you don't even have to know about it. And probable cause has been stretched to the point of, well, maybe, coulda, shoulda, mighta, we can do it. Where's the oath or affirmation, which is something that's taken under penalty of perjury, and where's the particular description of the places to be searched and the persons or things to be seized? The entire U.S. justice system operates outside of this amendment. They give so little attention to this that it is almost as if the Fourth Amendment doesn't exist. But why should we be surprised? The First and Second have been completely ignored. So the Fourth, which has its roots in common law and is an ancient right, is been completely violated. And this is important because this goes into all the issues of technological searching, of wiretaps. I question whether or not a court can really issue an order for a wiretap, because it doesn't. It talks about places to be searched and things to be seized. It doesn't talk about listening into conversations. That's neither a thing that can be seized or a person or a place to be searched. This is once again a great example of where the constitutional rights, our right to privacy, our liberty has been whittled away, and everybody has looked the other way. When telephones and electronic communications became popular, if, in the view of the Congress of the United States and 38 states, that there should be a right to issue warrants to listen, then they should have amended the Fourth Amendment and added that. They could do it for stupid things like lowering the voting age, which had always been a state issue determining who had the right to vote, but something so fundamental as our protection from unreasonable searches, they just sort of magically decided that it was going to be allowed. And now, since the Patriot Act and the NDAA, even those protections are taken away. So what rights do we have left if the government doesn't want to allow us to exercise them? In effect, none. This is much the same as when the Chief Justice of the United States, Roger B. Taney of Maryland, issued an order ordering President Lincoln to stop trying civilians in military courts. And the President of the United States, the great dictator as I call him, just ignored the court and went on and continued to try people in civilian courts. I mean, in military courts, even though the civil courts were still working. The executive authority uses fear, like this important thing of catching this bank robber right then, right there, to violate lots of people's rights. When I was in high school, I was taught in American civics that it was better that 10 guilty people go free than that one innocent man be jailed. Now I think it's the reverse. They would rather put 10 innocent people in jail or violate the rights of 10 innocent people to make sure that no guilty one or possibly guilty person go free or even have his rights. You know, they talk about, you have the right to remain silent, you have the right to this, you have the right to remain that. But do you when you're handcuffed? Do you when you're denied access to an attorney? Do you have those rights when push really comes to shove? Do you think that police even know anymore about the Fourth Amendment? Or even worse, the federal cops, the FBI, the Gestapo, the IRS? Do you think that they give a damn about your rights? How is it that a government which depends upon consent of the governed, a government by contract, which is what the United States was, this great blessing that America was given and was to give to the world, how can that government have greater rights than the people who gave it rights? Governments are artificial things created by people. People are real living souls created by God with rights that governments have no authority to take away. And by contract, because we can't live in an anarchy, we gave a limited amount of our personal God-given rights to the government to be used in a very limited, closely circumscribed manner to create a free country. And that freedom has been whittled away. Someone once said, patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel. Well, I think that's true. They cry and scream about security And yet the greatest danger to our personal security comes from the government of the United States, because they're the ones who are most likely to take your rights away from you. Not the Soviets or the Russians, not the Red Chinese, not the Mexican cartels, but the U.S. government. Now we have to break for the top of the hour. I'll be back in about 8 minutes. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio on the Overseas Radio Network.